There is nothing more dangerous than believing
I
that
understand something
just because I am familiar with it. There are books that simply provide information. There are also books that are like a mirror, forcing us to reflect on the movements that
most
seem natural of minds. Fast and slow thinking is the second type. It doesn't teach us how to think. That point out in detail. And sometimes it's ironic that most of what we think is thought. It's just a reflex sequence, and illusions are operating in the darkness of consciousness. Read this book. It's like opening the door to a room we've lived in all our lives, but never turned on the light. The prejudices, the hasty judgments, the strong beliefs suddenly become fragile when the light of reason shines. And then a quiet question comes up. If our own brains are constantly deceiving us, then we're really who we are when we're deciding for our lives. And before we get to the summary, we encourage our listeners to buy and read, to be able to feel the full content of the book. Because only if you read this book, you understand the problems you're hearing about. Buy a book and support the author. Because they're lighthouses that light up the sea, the vast amount of knowledge. And now, so let's start with me summarizing part 1 of this book. 2 systems in the story of the human mind. There are 2 main characters always present. They never appear on stage at the same time. A quick-witted knife-wielding intuitive and a slow-witted, contemplative calculation. We can't understand ourselves if you don't know the existence of the first 2. We call it a system that doesn't sleep. No command needed. In constant motion, his primal intuition is a reflex. Lightning when you see a shadow coming towards you. It's the feeling of knowing someone's face, even if you don't remember their name. The ability to complete the sentence fish meat water before others can open their mouths. He doesn't explain. Without analysis, he just reacts, and is usually right, until it's no longer true. The rest of System 2. Like a prudent judge. It only shows up when there's a big deal. Counting each number. Review all possibilities before making a decision. But you're very expensive. Every time work is. It consumes energy like a giant machine starts up. So he often gives the system a handle. Routine work. Only step out when the situation dictates. What's interesting and dangerous is this. System of fast. So much so that we think it's an unconscious instinct. But he's not immune to error. System 2 is more accurate, but lazy. Often believe the report of the System 1 without verification. And it's coordination or compromise. It's between these 2 people who decide everything. Our feelings and actions. Imagine you're driving on a familiar road. When I first learned to drive, 2-unit control system for mirror correction. Speed test, but after hundreds of hours of running, System 1 has learned every operation and it can automatically take you home. You don't remember the turns you've taken. Only when there's an unexpected situation, a car suddenly pulled over. System 2 immediately pops up and takes control. However, this automation, it also makes it easy to fall into the trap of consciousness. System 1 operates by association, and once it has linked it to B, will believe in that connection unconsciously. I see a serious face. Maybe that person is tough. Hearing a trembling voice. Maybe the person is lying. Conclusions like that come as fast as lightning, but it's not always true. Not only that, there's a more subtle phenomenon. Cognitive comfort. When information is repeated over and over again, clearly presented, easy to read system, an instant mount gives it reliable labels. A phrase that sounds familiar will be more persuasive than a brand new sentence, even if the content is no different. That's why SAO7 real rumors. If you repeat it enough, it will become a reality in the eyes of the crowd. This comfort is also involved in important decisions. A number in bold, a warm color on the product packaging, or just an easy-to-pronounce name. It all makes us biased. Without even realizing the system, a whisper. This is familiar, so safe. And System 2 doesn't want to waste energy. often nodding in agreement without further investigation. On a deeper level, System 1 acts as a giant association machine, where every picture sounds. All memories are connected to a network. Just need a keyword. The whole chain of related memories will pop up and say, "Doctor." You immediately think of the nurse saying bread. You think of butter or how everything happens instantly. No need to name. But also, this very mechanism. It's easy to be led by subtle cues. A fragrance, a piece of music, a fleeting image. We can all silently change the direction of our thoughts. And the strangest thing, we rarely realize that we're being manipulated. System a smooth operation like the background sound of life. Let System 2 believe that every decision is its own. But the truth is different. Most of what we believe we do has been a scriptwriter system before. And System 2 just plays the role of careless censorship. If System 1 is a tireless storyteller, System 2 is the easy editor. It's a story that makes sense emotionally. We'll usually pass the System 2 censorship without being questioned. We believe in a sequence of events just because it's coherent, not because it's right. This explains why we're so easily persuaded by more compelling narratives than by keeping the suit dry. The laziness of System 2 is evident. Where it dodges, everything requires effort, even when an important issue comes up. If the solution is available from a system that sounds reasonable, System 2 will quickly accept, instead of analyzing it yourself. This is the brain's energy-saving mechanism, but it's also the source of countless errors in thinking. A classic experiment that illustrates this. You're asked a stick, and one ball costs a total of $1.1. $1 more expensive than a ball. How much does it cost most people? Even the smart ones. Instant reply, 10 zu. That's the answer given by the system. But when System 2 actually works, the correct number is 5 cents. This small difference shows that we're usually satisfied with the first answer just because it comes easy. System 1 is also strongly influenced by the context. When you've just seen a series of 876, you'd estimate the number of countries in Africa is higher than when I just saw the series 1, 2, but even though the question is exactly the same. This effect is called nail anchoring, and it shows our consciousness. It's never completely objective. It's always pulled apart because of the information that came out earlier. The interconnection mechanism of System 1 can be useful. It helps us recognize patterns, predict the situation. It's also a double-edged sword. When an idea is associated with a strong emotion, it's going to activate a series of synchrony associations. It's bad news about the economy. Can make you pessimistic about your political future. Although these two areas are not directly related, that's how the mind creates the halo effect. A first impression, LAN out and coloring for every next evaluation. And then there's this thing called cognitive comfort. When an information is clearly presented, that's easy to read and easy to remember, it's become more reliable in our eyes. This is because SEO companies invest in logos, simple slow mounting, or eye-catching packaging. They're not just easy to identify, but also make consumers unconsciously attach with quality and reliability. The opposite is true when information is difficult to understand. System 2 is forced into action, and then we're more cautious, less gullible. But the paradox lies in pleasant feeling with the truth. A lie repeated enough times will become familiar, and then reliable. The advertising propagandists, even the information manipulators, all exploit this thoroughly. The familiar gradually replace for the right thing in our mind. And then, truth becomes a weakness in everyday life. System 1 helps us survive by reacting quickly, but at the same time, it also makes us fall into the illusion of understanding. When we witness an event, System 1 that instantly creates the right story, it makes us believe that we understand why it happened. System 2, unless especially vigilant, will nod in agreement. And so we're not just fooled by the world. but they're fooling themselves on a deeper level. These two systems do not work independently. It's constantly interacting. System 1 makes instantaneous predictions based on past data and current emotions. System 2 can correct false, but to do that, it takes willpower and energy. When we're tired, distracted, or stressed out. System 2 easy to loosen control. To system a complete lead. And that's when it's easy to make decisions, later regret it. There's one more aspect of these two systems that few AIs noticed. They don't just differ in speed and precision. It's about how they consume energy. System 2, whenever long operation is required, will drain your mental resources. It makes us vulnerable to willpower exhaustion. This phenomenon is called decision fatigue. After a long day, you have to think about your choices and make decisions. We become easier and less in control of ourselves. Be willing to take the easy route even if you know it's not optimal. A good example comes from studies of judges. When reviewing parole filings, higher likelihood of being approved by the offender significant in the morning, when the judge is awake, and plummet before lunch or at the end of the day, when energy is exhausted when tired. System 2 almost fell asleep. One-to-one handling system according to safety principle. Refuse to avoid risk. That's why any task requires a thorough analysis. We all become less efficient when we're tired. You can see this in your life. After having to focus on a complicated task, it's easy to fall in love with sweet food, impulsive shopping, or procrastinating on other important things. The irony is that the system is a much more powerful kind of system. When System 2 is weak, the instinctive reflexes, the momentary feeling, and deep-seated prejudice will easily take over. That's why SAO, regular advertising campaigns, aim for a time when the audience is relaxing, not to be alarmed when simple messages, repeated many times, can go straight into System 1 without being checked. System 1 is also in creating the illusion of truth. You just need to hear it over and over again. Will become familiar and therefore reliable. It's tied to a biological mechanism. The brain prioritizes easily processed information because it's less expensive. But that means we can believe something completely wrong just because it's easy to hear, easy to remember. There's another substitution effect. When faced with a difficult question, System A often surreptitiously with an easier question that it knows how to answer. For example, ask yourself how happy you are with your life. System 1 can silently, how does that translate into your mood today? And respond based on current emotions. System 2, if not alert, I'll accept that answer, as if it reflects the original question. This way of doing things makes us judge many important issues when deciding to buy a house. Instead of thoroughly analyzing the investment value, many people rely only on the impression of light, the space or window view when voting. Some people are affected by appearance or the candidate's voice. Instead of policy, System 1 likes the simple sensory signals. System 2 should have been more analytical, but often let things go by. The problem isn't that it's a better system than Kier. Both need a system that helps us respond in a timely manner, processing giant information in the blink of an eye. System 2 provides precision, checking, and planning. But it's the imbalance between them. When the system is too active and System 2 is too lazy, it's the cause of a series of cognitive errors. And decide. Understanding this relationship is the first step, so that we're less controlled by our unconscious reflexes. We don't always need System 2. Life will become numb if everything has to be analyzed in depth, but we can't let a system do its own thing. The secret is knowing when to trust your intuition and when to stop. Turn on System 2 and ask a question. A way to better visualize the differences between the two systems is to watch how they react with unexpected situations. I was walking and I saw an object fall from above. You immediately dodge to the side. It's a fast automated system that doesn't need analysis. Then a few seconds passed. System 2 is new. Looks like it's just a fallen leaf. It's not a brick based on System 2. Maybe you've been injured because you reacted too slowly. But if we just rely on one system, you're going to be dodging countless fake threats every day. However, this speed comes at a price. System 1 isn't very good with numbers and probabilities. It's more about stories than facts. When I heard that the plane had crashed, system an instant mount for the dangerous label flying. The probability of an accident is extremely low. System 2, if hard work, will remind you that millions of flights are safe every day, but the insecurity that's built up is hard to erase. This is why we often exaggerate rare risks and downplay the familiar risks. Traffic accident, heart disease, or poor eating habits. It's the leading cause of death, but it's less frightening than a terrorist attack. Something that rarely happens, but create powerful images in your memory. System a strong reaction to what is specific, vivid, and evocative. While System 2 has a lot of work to resist that attraction. Another feature of the system, it's the need to find consistency. He hates conflict, and I'll find a way to get rid of it or fill in the gaps. In the story, if part of the information is missing, System 1 will invent itself out the rest essay for reasonable. This creates the illusion of understanding. We believe we understand the cause of an event, when in fact, we're just assembling these, crumbling into a seamless story. The researchers also found that, when System 1 has formed an initial impression, System 2 usually becomes a defense attorney, then a fair judge. Instead of searching for the truth, it's looking for evidence to reinforce existing beliefs. Once you've trusted that AI is trustworthy, you're going to interpret their behavior in a positive way. And on the contrary, this fact is alarming. People are not only easy to make mistakes, it's about protecting those mistakes with your reason. System 1 laying the foundation, System 2 building the fence, and we're trapped in our own fortress of faith. However, there are still situations that System 1 is a reliable ally, with people with deep expertise, intuition. They've been trained through thousands of hours of experience to make the immediate response accurate. A chess player just needs to glance at the board, is to recognize the enemy's tactics. An experienced doctor, you can guess the disease just by looking at the gait or the color of the patient's face. Here System 1 is based on a huge data warehouse, be accumulated and sorted. It's not based on superficial connections. This leads to an important principle: reliable intuition when it comes from a stable environment. There are clear rules and decision makers. I've had a lot of experience in that environment. It's the opposite in very complex and volatile areas, or when we lack experience. The system can easily lead us to error and need close monitoring of System 2. But let System 2 monitor it effectively. It needs to be awakened. It requires us to recognize the warning signs. When the answer comes too quickly and too easily, when emotions are too strong, or when the context is too familiar to think about. It's time to pause, ask questions, and let System 2 have time to work. What we've just seen shows these two systems. It's not just about speed and functionality. It's two ways of existing side by side in the human mind. On the one hand is the survival instinct. On the one hand is analytical reason. The problem is, we often overestimate the role of reason and underestimate the power of instinct. Most of the time, System 1 that acts as the autopilot of our lives. It handles familiar situations, face recognition, understanding language, predict what's coming. System 2 only comes in when something is wrong, or when we deliberately focus, but the trap is there. Sometimes we think we're being controlled by reason, whereas actually System 1 has been driving before, and System 2 is just validating that decision. This makes it easy to fall into the illusion of self-control. I believe I am the decision maker. But really, a series of unconscious reflexes and biases, the small elements, as the order in which the information is presented, the way the question is asked, or mood at the time of receiving the information can turn the results around without our knowledge. It's one of the ways to identify influence of System 1 is to look at situations that we make decisions quickly. No need to think. Sometimes it's a sign of experience, but sometimes it's just an emotional reaction. Wisdom, it's about knowing when you can trust that reaction and when to hold back to check. System 2, on the other hand, isn't always the savior. It can be biased by beliefs themselves, created by System 1. It also consumes a lot of energy. It's easy to miss the necessary analysis when we're tired or under time pressure. The power of System 2, it's about completely replacing the one system. It's the ability to adjust, balance, and monitor it. Understanding of these two systems, it opens up a new perspective on people. It explains why we're smart in some situations, but they make stupid mistakes in other situations. It shows that emotions and reason are not the exact opposite of each other. It's two companions. Sometimes they complement each other, sometimes they hinder each other. If you want to improve your decision-making ability, we can't just think more or trust our feelings more. Instead, we need to know when to let the system lead, as in reacting to danger or in the field of expertise, and when to force System 2 to stay awake, as when faced with complex problems, financial decisions, or when new information contradicts old beliefs. Being aware of the limits of both systems also helps. We are more humble. I understand that I'm not always right. And a lot of really solid decisions, it's just the product of unconscious reflexes. This humility, if maintained, will become a hedge against big mistakes. And so, the story of Part 1 closes. In each of us, there are two companions. A quick but sometimes hasty person. A slow but lazy person. Together, they write every action, every choice. Every faith understands them. I will understand myself better and have the opportunity to change the way we live. Think and decide. Part 2, shortcuts and biases. There's an illusion that people have. I think I'm a rational being. Analyze the information and then make a decision. But the truth is much more naked most of the time. We rely on shortcuts to thinking. The heuristics that the brain uses to save time and effort. They're magic tricks. It helps us survive in a changing environment. But it's also the reason we keep making mistakes. According to the same pattern, imagine you have to answer a difficult question. What is the divorce rate in country X? If you have no data in hand, System 1 will do a very nice job. It's going to replace this question with an easier one. I don't know who's divorced in that country. Or do I remember any news about this? The answer comes quickly and smoothly, and you will believe it is reasonable. But that's just a question, not the real solution. One of the most powerful heuristics is the anchor effect. When you have to estimate a number, our brains are strongly influenced by the first number we see, even though it's completely random. If you ask how many countries there are in Africa, it's a member of the United Nations. They're spinning a forest number wheel at 65-4. Your estimate will be significantly higher than when the wheel stops at 10. Anchor is like a stone tied to the mine. You can pull it away, but rarely gets rid of its original weight. Remember the price negotiations. If the seller gives too high an initial figure, all prices will then be pulled up against the real value. That's why real estate brokers often take guests to see the house. Too expensive. To make the next house look more affordable. System 1 does not analyze thoroughly. It just feels this price looks good against the landmark. Anchor has just been laid out. Then there's the heuristic habit of judging based on superficial similarity instead of real probabilities. If you meet a person who is dressed in plain clothes, speaks fluently, you're more likely to believe they're lawyers than security guards. Even if the probability of a security job is many times higher. System 1 likes the rational story. With mold available, and it often ignores probabilistic logic. This is why people fall into traps, judge based on appearance, or believe in prejudice. Also cannot ignore the heuristic available trend of probability assessment based on how easy the event is to remember. If you've heard about shark attacks recently, you're going to judge swimming in the sea more dangerous than it actually is. The brain believes that being easy to remember means being frequent. But it's just an illusion. Reality. What I remember most. Often what's rare but dramatic. And that's why they distort our perception of the world. These heuristics are survival tools, great in the environment. It's when we need to react quickly to very little information. But in today's complicated world, they lead us to the wrong decisions. The danger is that we don't realize we're using them. The answer comes quickly and smoothly. It makes us believe that we've thought it through, while in fact, System 1 has automatically pressed the pre-selected button. If the heuristic anchoring effect, representation, and heuristic available are but there's another silent machine that the system works on. The need to find the cause. People hate coincidences, and the brain will make up the explanation, even if the data is too little or irrelevant. Imagine you're hearing about the stock price of a company increased during the day. Immediately System 1 will find the reason. Maybe because of the new product, good news from the market, or a new CEO. If there's no obvious reason, it's going to build a story out of bits and pieces of information. And when that story makes sense emotionally, System 2 will easily accept that as fact. This leads to the illusion of cause. We know because we know why everything happens, while in fact, many are. The statue is simply random, a variation of this illusion. It's the illusion of understanding after hindsight the event. Bias. When an event has happened, we look back and we see it. Obviously, the market crashed. I knew before that the bubble would burst. A divorced couple. I realized from the beginning that they didn't match. In fact, before it happens, no one is sure of anything. But System 1, with the need to turn everything into a slippery story true, will make me believe that I've always known. It's the same. Information framing effect. ISMIN. It's a clear evidence that human decision-making in how information is presented, and not just content. A surgical CA with a 90% hearing survival rate. It's much better than a 10% mortality rate. Even though the two sentences are statistically equivalent. System a response to the emotional context that words create. And System 2, if you're not conscious, will be dragged along without realizing. The power of the frame effect is also strong in politics, communication, and advertising. A new tax policy that can be described is to support income earners, low or punish the rich. Depending on the purpose of persuasion, each presentation evokes different emotions and thereby orient public opinion in the desired direction. Go deeper than Kahneman. It turns out that heuristics, it's not just a personal error, it's also systemic. That means putting 100 people in the same situation. Most people will make the same mistakes, because we all share these mechanisms of thinking. That's why these mistakes are called biases, quantity of business, instead of random mistakes. The point of discomfort is even knowing about them. It's still hard to avoid. Understand the effect. Anchors don't make us completely immune to it. That heuristics are available that distort perception. It doesn't make me overestimate the outstanding events. We can minimize the impact by actively activating the system. 2. Ask questions. Data request. Test assumptions. But this requires constant effort. And this is the paradox. The human brain is optimized to save effort, so it'll always prioritize shortcuts. We can't erase heuristics. The only thing we can do is learn to recognize when they are leading us. To decide whether to believe Theo, a clear demonstration of the power of heretics. It's how they confuse possibility and probability. When faced with a complicated situation, System 1 usually replaces the hard root with an easier question, and rely on immediate emotion to respond. This leads to a series of biases, but even smart people. Experience is hard to escape. The law of small numbers. makes us believe that a small sample still represents for the whole. If your friends drink an herbal tea and feel better, you can easily believe that this tea works, forgetting that personal experience. There's too little data to be conclusive. Small samples with very large fluctuations. It's easy to make the wrong impression, but the one system that loves simple stories will ignore the random factor and believe that rare evidence. Another bias is the illusion of the rationality of the Corin's beast. When a story is told smoothly and logically, we're more inclined to believe it regardless of the facts. For example, if you listen, Linda studied extraction with a deep interest in social justice. I have participated in protests against nuclear power. It's easy to assume that Linda is a bank employee who works because the environment is more rational. A banker. The probability of the second option is always higher. This is the conjunction fallacy trap, where system 1 is driven by stories rather than numbers. Then there's the illusion of predictability. When observing someone or a system that works stably for a while, I believe that I can accurately predict their future behavior. Forget that the random factor and external volatility is always there. Investors, for example, often believe that a fund is doing well, will continue to be so, even though long-term data shows past performance. It's just a poor prediction for the future. System 1 is also susceptible to the effect. The small world. We believe that everything happens for a specific reason. And if we know enough information, I can explain everything, but in reality, many complex phenomena operate according to the probabilities, rules, and it's impossible to accurately predict individual cases. Remarkable point is that these deviations are not the brain's fault. In the usual sense, they're a byproduct of a system optimized for speed, and it's effective in an evolutionary environment. In the primal jungle, it's about making quick decisions based on few signals. It can save lives. But in modern society, where huge information and complex systems, these shortcuts lead us to the wrong decision, especially in medicine, finance, and public policy. The most dangerous thing is not the existence of heuristics. It's the illusion that we're immune to them. I feel like I know I'm thinking rationally. It's a sign that system 1 has won, and system 2 is asleep. I realized that man's greatest weakness, it's not the lack of information. It's how we process that information. We believe we're watching the world in an objective way, but actually, all the facts go through the lens of these mind shortcuts. And when these shortcuts work smoothly, I rarely feel the need to check. One of the inherent biases is confirmation bias. When we have that initial belief, we're looking for information, reinforce it, and ignore the conflicting facts. If you think the real estate market will rise, I'll pay attention to all the positive news and ignore the warning signals. It's not just unconscious bias, it's also how the brain saves energy. It's much easier to keep a familiar story instead of accepting it as wrong. There are also times when a system is so confident not just ignore the conflicting data, it's also making connections between discrete events. We see two events happening close together and immediately concluded that this caused that. Meanwhile, the actual probability may be just a coincidence, but a human story. Obviously, it's always attractive to admit that sometimes the world is simply chaotic. When applying heuristics in decisions related to risk, we often judge it completely wrong. Studies show that people have a tendency to overestimate high probability of rare but dramatic events and underestimating the probability of a common event. More afraid of terrorism than heart disease. I'm more afraid of sharks than traffic accidents. That's clear evidence. The brain prioritizes powerful imagery, not prioritizing probability. Another subtle factor is the memorability of memories. When an image, sounds, or stories held in memory, it's going to be systemically an important label. So the news movies are full of blood and fire. The touching stories, or a powerful personal experience, can shape our perception of an entire problem, even if the overall data says the opposite. I've seen this over and over again in finance, medical, and political. It's a rare event, but a shock could change national policy. Just because the public can't get it out of their minds. The dry statistics. In thousands of other cases, there's no equivalent emotional weight. And when emotions prevail, the mind steps back. The most dangerous thing is that we believe thinking rationally, while actually, it's just following a familiar script that the brain has already written. Heuristics don't just affect answers. It also determines the questions that we ask ourselves. When the question is wrong, all attempts at reasoning behind are meaningless. What I've learned after 15 years of observation is that they rarely make decisions based solely on facts. Every choice seems logical. It's all shaped by the way information appears and the way it touches emotions. A number that does not exist independently. It's set in a story, a scene, and that's what determines how we feel. When you have to choose between two options, describing their benefits or losses, it will lead to completely different results. The same drug, but the survival rate is 90%, will be more acceptable than the 10% mortality rate. This is not a change in data. It's about changing the lens of vision and the brain. Especially System 1 is always affected by that lens. There are cases. Heuristics help us react quickly and in the right direction. I'm driving and I see the front brake lights go on. We immediately decelerate without any analysis. But in complex issues like investment, forecast, or policy making, these shortcuts turn into traps. They give us a sense of certainty when in fact, I'm just holding an illusion. I've seen investors who are absolutely confident in their spirit after a few successful deals, only to lose it when the market moves. They forget that their previous success, maybe it's just the result of luck, but System 1 turns it into evidence of superior capabilities. And when this belief is strong enough, System 2 will also stop protesting, become an unconditional nod. The cognitive biases. It doesn't make a difference between smart and less smart people, experienced or just starting out. They're a collective product of how the brain evolves. That's why we want to minimize mistakes. We can't just rely on self-confidence. We've got to build a process that forces System 2 to engage. This process involves actively searching for data contrary to the original belief, comparing multiple information frames, and identify the emotional factors that are driving the decision. But even if there's a process, we still can't completely eliminate the influence of heuristics. They're like the undercurrent in the mind. Sometimes it helps us sail the wind. Sometimes we go in the wrong direction. Understanding them is not to be eliminated, but to learn how to control the boat. Know when to let go and when to close the handlebars. What we think is logical thinking. It's actually just a thin shell coding series automatic mechanism. Sentimentality and bias. Only when you realize this, we have a chance to make more conscious decisions, even knowing that, even then, the brain's shortcuts still waiting to lead us along the way. Part B, overconfidence. The confidence. It's what helps people get out of their comfort zone. Dare to try things you never did. But when it's over the line, it's turned into a trap. It's a trap that the victim doesn't recognize until they've slipped. I call it overconfidence. And it's not just a bad habit. It's a bias that's deeply ingrained in how the brain works. The root of overconfidence lies in the illusion that we understand more than reality. Looking back on the events that happen, the brain will build a smooth story full of cause. The result is clear. Remember the steps that lead to the result. But I forgot that I was confused. I used to be unsure. And then when the story is done, it feels like we've always known that. Although the truth is quite the opposite. One obvious example is the financial world. After a strong market growth, investors look back and believe that this increase is predictable. They tie it to factors like monetary policy, market psychology, or consumer trends, but before that happens, no one can say for sure. They forgot that at that time, the picture is murky and full of different possibilities. This is the illusion of predictability. And that's accompanied by this delusion of random disdain. We like to think that success is the result of skill. 7. Failures are due to mistakes or circumstances. Luck and risk play a bigger role than we'd like to admit. A fund manager can win big 3 years in a row, but it's mostly because of the favorable market. When the wind comes, the real skill is revealed, and it's often not as glorious as the previous story. More dangerous, when a success story has been accepted, it's become a template for predicting the future. We're looking at factors that have come up before, and hopefully they'll produce the same results. The brain loves consistency, so it ignores the possibility that the context has changed. And these new factors will lead to completely different outcomes. Overconfidence. It also causes us to misjudge our own abilities in areas where we have little experience. This phenomenon is so common that it has its own name: Dunning-Kruger effect. The less understanding, they often overestimate their abilities, while the really good are self-doubting. This creates a paradox. It's the people who are the least confident in their decision. Overconfidence. It's not just limited to inexperienced people. Even the most seasoned professionals have it. Sometimes even more serious. Long experience brings them huge data warehouse. And that's it. Make them believe that. I see the rules in complex situations. But the world, it rarely works according to a fixed rule. It transforms interaction. And there's a lot of unpredictable factors. In areas such as economics and politics, people in high positions are often forced to make predictions. This forecast was made by the public as a form of truth. When a forecast is right, it strengthens the reputation of the person who gives when it's wrong. Collective memories are often overlooked or quickly forgotten. This creates a dangerous loop. Who regularly forecast confidence, it will be considered more reliable, even though their true rates are not higher than others. A classic experiment that illustrates this: when asked to make a forecast of an event, and with my level of conviction, most people overestimate accuracy. For example, they said I'm 90% sure, but the true rate is only about 70%. This gap between belief and reality is the measure of overconfidence. And it's in almost every group of people, from students to military professionals. One factor that contributes to this phenomenon is how the brain processing a memory when a prediction is wrong. We often explain that the cause lies in an unusual event or incomplete information, instead of admitting that our thinking model is flawed. The memory of predictions is also often edited. I remember saying something different from reality, or remember that I suspected it from the beginning, even if there's no evidence. The consequences of overconfidence are especially pronounced. In strategic decisions, a CEO, you may believe that the acquisition will be profitable, based on experience from previous successes. But they can forget that the last time it happened in a different context, or by luck factors that can't be recreated. When deciding based on familiar stories rather than objective data, the risk increases significantly. The scary thing is overconfidence. It often brings a sense of persuasion to others who spoke in a determined voice without hesitation. It's easier to see as reliable, regardless of whether the content is accurate or not. This is why some bad decisions are made when it's strongly supported. It's not because people believe in data. It's because they believe in the determination of the leader. One of the manifestations, the most subtle form of overconfidence, it's an illusion of the accuracy of existing information. When we have a specific set of data, the brain thinks it's enough to draw conclusions, even if that piece of data, it's just a small piece of the big picture. We don't realize that what we know is surrounded by a vast blind area. Areas that, if illuminated, it can completely change the way we see it. I've seen this happen. When teams of experts analyze the market, they can have very detailed numbers about an industry, and from there build predictive models. These models look scientific and rugged, but often ignore the unexpected variables, disaster policy changes, or emotional upheaval of consumers. When an unexpected event occurs, the whole model collapses. But they're quick. Build a new story to explain, as if the results were still in the pipeline. overconfidence. It also makes us underestimate the volatility of the world. We forget that many systems, from the stock market to the weather, which is chaotic and unpredictable. Instead of accepting uncertainty, the brain tries to force the world into an understandable structure, reduces feelings of anxiety, but there's a price to pay for this peace of mind. It's decisions based on the wrong model. Part of the cause is that people aren't very good at probabilistic thinking. Instead of saying there's a 30% chance, we often say it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. System 1 likes white answers, black, and determination makes us feel in control of the situation. But in reality, the world works in the gray zone. And ignoring probabilities, it makes us easily surprised by the results. I realized a paradox. Early successes foster excessive self-confidence. When a risky decision is successful, we don't just record results, but also ascribe credit to themselves for their skills, ignoring the element of luck. And as many times as that, the more willing we are to make risky decisions. They believe they have a special ability to control the outcome. Until you're lucky enough to leave, the fall will be even more painful in the military, business, or politics. The biggest mistakes, it usually comes from people who have resounding. Victory brings confidence, confidence reduces alertness, and lack of vigilance opens the door to 7 defeats. But this loop is rarely seen from the inside. Only when looking back from a distance, I can see how clear it is. It's one of the most dangerous consequences of overconfidence. It's the illusion of control. When we get used to seeing the connection between your actions and the results are achieved, the brain will start to believe that I can control even the factors that are out of reach. The truth is, it's not always good. It's also the result of skill, and not every bad result is a personal mistake. But when you believe in absolute control, we act as if we're immune to risk. In the corporate environment, this is evident in decisions to scale up, or large investment, a company that can succeed massively in the domestic market, and the board believes that the same formula, it will work in other countries. They ignore cultural differences, politics, and law, variables that can't be driven by old experience. And when Project 7 failed, the familiar explanation echoed. We were unlucky this time. Overconfidence is also capable of LAN transmission. When a leader is certain, without hesitation, people around you will be caught up in a false sense of security. This is especially dangerous in decision-making groups because it reduces critical bias. Warning voices are seen as lacking faith or compassion. And finally, the whole group slips by the inertia of false beliefs. Another factor that contributes to maintaining self-confidence, the distance between the action and the consequences. When the consequences do not appear immediately or are unclear, the brain tends to underestimate risk, a reckless decision that can take months, even years to reveal the consequences. During that time, each temporarily positive result is reinforce the illusion that we're going in the right direction. I've met stock traders who believe that their strategy can't be wrong just because it's profitable for a few months in a row. They forgot that the market may be in a good phase, and any AI would benefit from doing the same. Until the cycle changes, their portfolios evaporated faster than they could react. And then, confidence stories become bitter lessons every day. The sad thing is that even after 7 defeats, many people still don't give up their overconfidence. The brain reconstructs memories, makes 7 failures an exception, and keep the faith about your ability to control yourself. That's why overconfidence isn't just a mistake. It's a self-defense system. Continue to fortify and feed itself. When closely observed, I realized that overconfidence doesn't exist in isolation. It's a combination of multiple mechanisms: selective memory, illusions of control, random low review, and comfort with coherent stories. They're intertwined. It forms an invisible web around our thoughts, making it difficult to get out. The problem isn't just that we value ourselves more than we actually do, but also the fact that the surroundings are often give your confidence A person who speaks with conviction. It's easier to get promoted than someone who hesitates. A market analyst makes a strong forecast, will attract more attention than the cautious. In a world where attention is a precious resource, assertiveness is sometimes more important than accuracy. The result is successful people, thanks to overconfidence, continue that radiating for others. The success story. It is not included in the details about the luck factor or uncontrollable variables. You see only one clear path from point A to point B and believe they can repeat it. No matter the context is different. But things get dangerous when big decisions are made. Billions of dollars investment war. National policy, again brought forth in this mental state, when the risk is underestimated and the predictability is overrated. The whole system will be thrown into a fragile situation. And when that happens, the consequences don't just stop at an individual or an organization. That lan out the whole society. The paradox is overconfidence. It's almost impossible to remove completely. It's tied to the nature of the brain. It's an evolutionary tool to make quick decisions in the environment. Not sure, but if it can't be removed, we can still control. The only way is to create a countervailing mechanism, actively seeking the opposite view. Require evidence for all predictions, and remind myself that I can be wrong. Humility, wisdom is not weakness. It's a protective wall against big mistakes. Every time I realized I overestimated my ability, we don't just avoid a fall. But I also learned one more lesson about the limits of human consciousness. And it's there. In the moment we acknowledge the uncertainty, it's where intelligent thinking begins to take shape. Part 4. A long time ago, we are taught that people make decisions based on reason. In classical economics, each individual is considered a rational optimizer. Comparison of benefits and costs, then choose the option with the greatest value. But the reality of observing life's choices, I realized one thing. We don't measure the absolute value of results. Instead, we compare them to a reference point, a mental milestone that we consider normal or expected. If a person is making 20 million a month, and then it's increased by 5 million, they feel satisfied. But someone else made 30 million, and then it's down to 25 million. You will feel the loss, even though they both ended up at 25 million. Their emotions don't come from sheer numbers, but where the results are compared to the original reference mark. It's from this observation I've built prospect theory. It starts with a simple but powerful truth. People hate loss more than they like gain. Losing $100 causes much stronger pain compared to the joy of $100. This phenomenon is called loss aversion, and it affects almost every decision we make. From consumption to investment, from contract negotiation to national policy, loss aversion leads to seemingly irrational behavior. In investment, a person who is willing to hold a losing stock for a long time just to avoid materializing the loss, because selling out means admitting the loss, but at the same time, they're willing to sell a profitable stock right away. Even in the long run, keeping it can be more profitable. Fear of loss makes us take risks when we're losing. Take risks when you're winning. It's the exact opposite of optimal strategy. The point of reference is not always clear. It can be formed from the initial purchase price, current salary, social expectations, or simply the most recent results we've experienced. And when the reference point changes, the way we see risk also changes. An athlete who finished second with a tight gap, they are usually 7 times more hopeful because their point of reference is victory, and people back to buck compared to almost no medal. But asymmetry, it's not just about pleasure and pain. It's also amplified by the information framing effect. When an outcome is described as a 90% probability of survival, people react differently compared to when it's described as a 10% chance of death. Even though they're the same reality, how information is framed change the perspective of the system, and system 2 rarely intervene in time to neutralize that influence. What's interesting prospect theory explains many of these phenomena that classical economics can't explain. Why people buy insurance for small risks? To avoid mental loss. At SAO, the negotiations or when deadlock, one side feels more lost, and at SAO financial markets can fall into a state of collective panic just because of a sudden discount. When you look closer, I realize loss aversion. It doesn't just affect financial decisions. It's involved in almost every area of life. A salary increase negotiator can react strongly with a 5% cut in income, but not quite as excited about a 5% increase. An athlete taking more risks than usual when you are losing, just to avoid the feeling of 7 defeats. This asymmetry forms the value line of prospect theory. The whole is much steeper than the word. In other words, the pain of loss is often doubled, 3 times as much pleasure as it gets. This explains why we're usually conservative when everything is going well, but it's risky to try to unscrew the loss. A clear example is the behavior of investors in the market when a stock is losing money. Many people embrace in the hope that it will pay off, because selling out means locking your losses into reality. The opposite is when a stock goes up. They sell early to save money, although the probability of further increase is still high. This is paradox, loss aversion, causing them to unwittingly cut profits and prolong losses. Reference point. It's what determines whether we feel we're gaining or losing. It's very flexible and easy to manipulate. It can be set by the most recent personal experience, the original purchase price, or information from others. A person who buys cheap airline tickets will be satisfied until you know that your friends are buying the same flight for a lower price. Immediately, the reference point moves, and the feeling of satisfaction turns into regret. In fact, they lose nothing. Marketers understand this very well and use it as a tool. When a product is labeled from 500,000 down, and your 350,000 points of reference would be 500,000, and 350,000 becomes a bargain, even if the really reasonable price is only about 300,000. The feeling of avoiding loss is much stronger than feeling the extra benefit. Another interesting aspect, it's how people deal with small probabilities. Prospect theory shows that we often exaggerate the value of very small probabilities. They're willing to pay a lot of money to completely eliminate the risk, or buy lottery tickets even though the probability of winning is almost zero. The feeling that there's a chance, even if it's fragile, stimulating, then improving an already high probability. This is explained by SAO insurance. Number books and many forms of betting exist in parallel. The same person can buy insurance to eliminate the 1% risk of loss, and also buy lottery tickets to chase a 1% chance of winning big. In terms of rationality, these two decisions contradict each other, but emotionally, both are reasonable. One to avoid loss, one to dream of winning. To go deeper into how we handle risk, I realized a paradox. The same person can hate risk, just looking for risk. It depends on whether they're in profit or loss compared to the reference point. While winning, we often avoid risks to preserve results. While losing, we're willing to make big bets for a chance to untie the gauze. This phenomenon explains the behavior in the casino. A player who wins will bet more cautiously, but when you lose deep, they often increase their bets, not because you believe you will win, but losing more is not so much worse than losing now. While the opportunity to take it all back still exists, the brain at a loss becomes more reckless, motivated by loss aversion. They're looking for a big win to take away the emotional pain. Another important consequence of prospect theory is the nonlinearity of emotion, the difference between 0 and 100 units of value. It's a much stronger emotion. That's the difference between 1,000 and 1,100, even though they're both 100 units in other words. The emotional impact diminishes as the absolute value increases. This is why it's okay to remove a whole small fee. Can bring no less satisfaction. Reduce a larger fee, but only a small percentage. When applied to public policy, this opens up different approaches. For example, in programs that encourage energy savings, Messages avoid waste are often more effective. Save more, because it strikes fear of loss instead of potential gain. Similar, it's a public health campaign can focus on the risk of health loss rather than promising improved health. To promote preventive behavior, information frame effects continue to play a key role. When you have to choose between two medical options, it's a sure shot to save 200 lives. And one option has a 1/3 chance of saving all 600 people, but 2/3 of them can't save AI. Most people will choose the first safe option. But when the same problem is expressed, that's for sure, 400 compared to a 1/3 chance of no AI dying, 2/3 chance of 600 dead, most people are more inclined to take risks. The only change here is how it's framed. Once focused on survival, once focused on death. I realize that the choices we make, whether it's about money, health, or time, it's all very strongly dependent on the psychological context. We are not machines, absolute value calculator. It's emotional creatures, continuously measured and lost against an invisible standard. And that's the norm. The new reference point is what shapes behavior, more than the result itself. One thing I've noticed is the reference point never stands still. It moves over time, according to new experience, and also according to the social comparisons that we're constantly making. When we achieve an accomplishment, it's quickly becoming the new normal. And all the results will then be compared to this new level, instead of the starting point. That's why satisfaction usually only lasts for a short time. A big winner can be happy for a few months, but then their standard of living and their expectations will rise. And what used to be the giant benefit become the default platform. It's not because people are ungrateful. It's because the brain is built process to adjust the standard. Keep looking for new rewards. This also explains at SAO the sudden losses has a much deeper impact compared to equivalent interest rates. When the loss occurs, the reference point is pulled down suddenly. And this feeling hits the emotional system hard. It's not like adapting to benefits. It happens slowly. Damage 7 creates an immediate shock to leave a lasting mark on the memory. In the business environment, the management of customer expectations is a clear illustration. A company that can keep service prices stable for many years, but even a slight increase can create a wave of protest. Customers feel it is a loss. Compared to the old reference point, reverse discount or a discount often doesn't generate lasting excitement because customers quickly adjust expectations. And that's the new standard. Another consequence of loss aversion, it's the tendency to lock into the choices that we make now, even if there's a better way. People often value more than they own, compared to not owning it. It's called the Enderman effect. I just need something that belongs to me. Its perceived value increases, and it's much harder to give up than getting it originally. This effect doesn't just apply to matter, a job position. It's a relationship, or even a long-standing habit. Everything can become property. The psychology we try to keep, even if giving up, it will bring greater benefits. The reason is that the brain doesn't compare benefits new to the present, objectively. It's about what you lose if you change. Every change. All have to overcome the psychological barrier of loss. Successful leaders often understand this and find ways to frame change as an addition, more than a replacement, to reduce the natural resistance. By observing thousands of human decisions in different situations, I realized that our choices, it's not just about benefits and costs. It's also because of the stories we tell ourselves. We want to believe that we're consistent, reasonable, and in control of the circumstances, but realistic. These stories are often built on a foundation, emotional background, and fluctuating reference point. Prospect theory shows that we react to change, not react directly to the absolute state. One person loses from the investment. It hurts more than someone who doesn't invest, and I didn't make that money. The difference is not in the end result. It's the psychological journey from point A to point B. This opens up an important understanding. If you want to change human behavior, We need to change the reference point or how they feel about the reference point. A new welfare policy, if presented as an additional bonus, it will be much easier to accept as opposed to it replacing an old interest, even though the total value is equal. Realizing the impact of loss aversion and the information framing doesn't mean that we can easily overcome them. Even when you know you're affected, emotions still play a strong role in decision-making. This is part of the reason at SAO marketing campaigns, politics and media are often successful when exploiting the fear of loss rather than promising benefits. Another application is in the field of negotiation. When a proposal is presented as avoiding damage instead of achieving benefits, it's often more persuasive. Good negotiators know how to shape their requirements to trigger the opponent's natural protective response, make them willing to give in to avoid loss. People are not machines, objective benefit optimization machines. They're creatures that maximize emotional value compared to the reference point they're clinging to. Understanding this not only helps us better predict behavior of others, it also helps us to see ourselves better, make a decision, and sometimes the courage to adjust it before it's too late. Part 5. I've been around for a long time. I was obsessed with the seemingly simple question. When you say I'm happy, what am I talking about? This question leads me to an important discovery. In every human being there are two distinct selves, and they don't always agree. The me experience of living in the constant flow of time. It feels every moment. The taste of your morning coffee, stinging pain in the knee, a friend's laughter with it. Happiness or suffering measured by the quality of every moment that's happening. If this series of moments is pleasant, what I experience is that life is good. What I remember is different. It doesn't live in the moment. That lives in memories and stories. It doesn't matter how many hours you've spent, pleasant or unpleasant. It only retains the most striking pieces and the end of the experience. It's this self that decides what story you tell about the period. Last break, an ended love affair, or a painful surgical CA. And this is where the conflict comes in. What I'm experiencing wants to maximize comfort in the present. What I remember, want to maximize a memorable story? Even though the story may contain moments of suffering. I asked a group of people, if your first vacation was fun, but all your photos and memories are deleted, do you still choose to take that trip? Many people hesitate because they realize much of the value of the journey lies in the ability to recount, share, and remember it. It's not just about enjoying it when it happens. What I remember has a strange characteristic. It doesn't measure time. Honestly, a pleasant experience that lasts twice as long. I'm not sure it's twice as happy. Because what I remember only retains a few emotional landmarks, especially at the top, at best or worst, and the end. Here's the top rule. A great vacation, but it ended in a stormy day. They may be ranked lower. A trip just at a normal rate, but the end is brilliant. Even. This applies to even unpleasant experiences. In a medical study, the patient undergoes a painful procedure, but it ends with a few minutes of lightness. They often measure that experience more pleasant than someone with less total pain time, but it ends in high pain. I remember forgiving for a long time, as long as the ending is better. This leads to a strange consequence. What I remember is the decision maker for the future. When choosing a travel or career destination, we often rely on memories of previous experiences, not based on the actual quality of the moment have lived, and because the memory is distorted, our future choices are also led astray. The difference between the two I've created, paradox that, if you don't notice, I'll never realize. One of them is the happiness paradox. We often plan for the future, based on the desire of what I remember, while what I experienced, the one who really lives in the future. Take a beach vacation, for example. During the trip, you may have to endure many moments, not very pleasant, hot weather, long, tired ride, or unpalatable food. What I experience will be judged. This is a temporary, or rather exhausting vacation. But if a few bright moments appear, a beautiful sunset, a night of fun, and the trip ended in good air. What I remember will retain the story of a vacation. Great, this is also true in reverse. It's an almost perfect experience. It ended with a small incident, lost wallet quarrel, or being late for a flight will be degraded by memory. What I remember doesn't care about the whole thing. It's about the climax and the end. As a result, we make decisions based on a distorted version of the real experience. When choosing the next holiday, I didn't ask if I would enjoy every day there. He asked me if I wanted to tell this story again. What I remember is a good storyteller, but it's not honest with us. Go deeper. I realized the duration and intensity of the experience for an hour listening to your favorite music. Not rated twice as happy as half an hour. If the end of both is the same, this is in stark contrast to the logic of the self experience that adds up to every pleasant moment. These differences also influence health decisions. In many CAs, surgery or treatment, pain relief in the final stage of the process will make it easier for the patient to remember the experience, even if the total amount of pain is not significantly reduced. On the contrary, if a CA treatment is shorter but it ended in a lot of pain, the memory of it will be worse. That's why, when you want to create a lifetime experience, even if it's an event, a trip, or a media campaign, people often focus on building a moment, top-notch, and a perfect finish. This is the strategy of talking directly to what I remember, who will keep the story, and let's direct our actions later. When you understand the two of me, I'm beginning to realize an unsettling truth. What I experienced can live a life full of pleasant moments. But what I remember is that life was boring. And from there, that lead us to decisions that change the whole course. Imagine a stable job, comfortable environment, low pressure, every day passes smoothly. What I experience will be satisfied. It's lived in a long chain, moments without stress. But if the work doesn't create striking memories, there's no emotional peak to hold. What I remember will be added boring labels for this period of time, and when you have to choose between doing that or try a challenging new job, what I remember will motivate us to take risks, although what I experience may be more painful. This conflict is explained in human SAO. Sometimes we choose roads full of obstacles just in exchange for a few bright moments, or willing to endure prolonged hardship to own a remarkable story. A climber conquering the top in extreme weather conditions, not because every moment is wonderful. It's because the memory of victory feeds what I remember. For many years later, I also realized that what I remember, there's a tendency to measure happiness by stories, not by data. If life's story sounds or is full of landmarks, the exciting milestones, it will be considered worth living. No matter the long tiring hours or the pain that I've experienced. It's the opposite of a quiet, steady life. It brings a lot of happiness to what I experience. It can be seen as a lack of meaning in retrospect. What I remember needs material to make a compelling story. And this, sometimes we make bad decisions, preferential to real daily happiness. Another consequence, we often judge wrong length of positive experiences. In memory of a 3-hour party, not necessarily fun 3 times 1 lasting 1 hour, if they both end up in a happy atmosphere. But a long party that ends bland can be underestimated by a short meal, but the end explodes. These things force me to ask questions. When we say we want a happy life, we're talking about the happiness of the self. If the answer is what I remember, maybe we will accept sacrificed a lot of the actual happiness of what I experienced. And sometimes it's more expensive than we think. Once I realize the power of what I remember, I'm starting to see clearly. It doesn't just shape the story of the past. It's also manipulating how we plan for the future. When deciding on a trip, a job, or a relationship, I remember not asking, will my everyday come out, and ask, will this story be worth telling? That's why many people choose the experiences that I experience. It will be considered difficult, just because what I remember believes it's going to be a precious memory. A student, you can choose to volunteer in a remote area. He knows that living conditions will be harsh, only to be able to recount it later as a memorable milestone. This phenomenon also occurs in the medical field. When patients are asked how they want to treat, many people choose more unpleasant methods, but it's got more impressive results to tell about, instead of the softer method, but equally effective. This shows that sometimes what I remember is willing to trade the actual comfort of what I experience to create a stronger story. I call this the tyranny of memory. What I remember is the person who wrote a biography of our lives, and he always wanted his story to be dramatic. There's a high point and a high point, but that's why it can involve us in decisions. It does not serve the continuous happiness of the self. It's worth noting that in many cases, we don't even realize this conflict. I remember a great vacation. I believe that every day of the holiday was pleasant, although in fact, there may be times of fatigue, boredom, or discomfort. The story has been carefully edited, so much so that we forget the unattractive parts. The autocracy of memory is also reinforced by society. We are encouraged to live to have something to tell. Accumulate memories. As if the memory, it's the only proof of the value of life. Social media makes this even more powerful. What I remember isn't just storing the story for myself, but also showing it in public, blurring the line between living to experience and live to tell. This leads to a difficult question. If we want to maximize happiness, let's prioritize the ego. If you prioritize what I experience, we will choose a comfortable life, stable little climax, but sustainable. If you prioritize what I remember, we're going to take these turbulent, up and down journeys, with emotional highs and lows, even if you have to accept a lot of unpleasant moments along the way. If there's one big lesson from separating the two egos, then it's that happiness is not a unified whole. What I experience and what I remember have their own dimensions, and they can lead us to choices completely different. What I experience is interested in the present. It measures happiness by quantity and the quality of pleasant moments. If one day you live in peace, it's full of little things that make us smile, it will give you a very high score, no matter if there is a special event or not. It measures life like a long video, where every frame is important. What I remember is the opposite. It measures happiness by story, with memorable highlights. It's willing to skip hours every day, even months of discomfort, if it's a happy ending in return, or an unforgettable peak. In his eyes, life is a novel, and fiction, or need climax, even tragedy. This difference, it has a profound impact on how we design our lives. If you don't realize, we can live in conflict. Plan according to the wishes of what I remember. But there are 7 when what I experience, not feeling happy. We can choose glamorous work, travel to distant places, participate in major events, just to realize most of the time, those choices are exhausting, pressure and stress. But there's no denying it. What I remember gives us a sense of meaning. If it's only optimal for what I experience, life can be quiet, but there's a lack of stories that we're proud to look back on. Many people are willing to accept pain to remember. They're not looking for constant happiness. It's looking for a story worth telling. The hard question is how to balance the two egos. The answer may lie in conscious that they exist, and know that I'm prioritizing AI in every decision. If a choice brings few pleasant moments, but make a bright memory, let's accept that in a proactive way, instead of letting the memory manipulate. If you want a peaceful life, protect what I experience, even if the story looks bland from the outside. Finally, I was the main character of the movie that was playing, just the audience watching. It would be a mistake if you let one of those two roles go completely. The remaining role, a full life. Maybe it's life that when you live, I feel warm in every moment. And when I look back, I think the story is worth telling again. Thank you for taking the time to accompany until the last pages of this book. I know that not everyone is patient to choose. It's a journey full of concepts, experiments, and psychological layers. Sometimes we have to stop to wonder, how many times have I thought wrong about myself? Reading a book like this, it's not just about getting information. It's about looking in the mirror of your own mind, with all the cracks, the patches of light, and the illusions. If what you just heard makes you stop doubting an old belief, or quietly adjust a decision, this book has fulfilled its mission. I hope you will leave a review or comment. It's not about measuring the good or the bad of the book, according to the usual measure, but to record a part with me, in your own thought, experience, what has changed, what is still solid, and what makes you want to go deeper. And if you have a book that you yearn to hear, to be dissected and screened together, give me a hint. Because the journey of knowledge is never, it's just a lonely road. It's an endless conversation between curious people, ready to ask the question again with both the world and myself.